known when the proposed budget was finalized in February. The proposed budget is meant to include flexibility to accommodate this additional activity. However, P5 management will continue to proactively manage costs should we experience any softening in demand. Next slide. Moving to capital, as Robin noted in her introduction, the proposed CIP funds critical renewal and replacement projects. Several of the largest projects that will have a beginning in FY24 includes beginning on a roof replacement for the Arlene Snitzer Concert Hall, replacing the Newmark stage floor, which is the original stage floor in the building, as well as replacing an aging generator, elevators, and communication systems. The key theme across these projects is preventing building or critical system failures to ensure operations continue safely and without interruption. Next slide. The sum impact of both operation and capital project activity is an authorized drawdown of $4.4 million of accumulated fund balance due to pandemic era support, and most significantly, $10 million in Shuttered Venues Operators Grant that Portland 5 received. This will still leave fund balance higher than at the beginning of fiscal year 22. And staff believes that this use of fund balance is justified to make necessary investments in both Portland 5's physical capital as well as investments in its human capital that will be discussed more when we get to the FY24 budget modifications. I'm now going to pass it over to Portland 5's Director of Culture and Community, Ruby White, to talk about Portland 5's diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Ruby Joy White. I use Prince, they, and she pronouns. I'm the Director of Culture and Community at P5. Some of you might know me also from my previous work at Metro, where I was at Parks and Nature as the Equity and Racial Justice Program Manager, so not new to Metro. So I came on board in September of 2022. As then was known as the Education and Community Engagement Department. And so that was my director's title. But I was feeling as though that wasn't actually reflective of the work that we were trying to do with our DEI initiatives, and then also what we were trying to do with community as well as our youth program. Shortly after I was hired, we went through a hiring process to bring on a coordinator who was then known as the Education and Community Engagement Coordinator, who's really fabulous. Her name's Lillian Pham. We've since changed her title also to the Youth Arts and Culture Manager so that it actually reflects the type of work that she's doing. So I just want to go ahead and give you all a bit of context on what our department does. So one thing to know is that we steward P5's DEI work, but that doesn't mean that we are the DEI department, right? So DEI work at P5 is everyone's job, but we are stewarding it and more so guiding it and providing the parameters around what that should look like. So with that being said, we kind of see it in practice within about, I want to say 3 branches of our department. We have the cultural aspect of our department. So that really focuses on that internal as well as what does external DEI work need to look like. We have our community arts program, which is something that I steward, and then we have our youth arts program. So shifting from just merely calling it education to youth arts and also allowing us to expand on what we mean by youth. So I'll go ahead and start by talking about our youth arts program. So formerly, our youth arts program kind of had like a low touch, I want to say, when it came to engagement with youth. So we focused on bringing in folks from Title I schools to experience what P5 had to offer. That is providing a menu of events that students from across Title I schools could come to. And that was pretty much it with some, I want to say, low touches in the community, doing some tabling, et cetera. So what I really wanted to do was actually engage youth in making the decisions regarding how, right, they actually are exposed to the content that we want them to be exposed to, especially when we're talking about our Black, Indigenous, and people of color youth, talking about our youth who are low income, of mixed citizenship status, queer, trans, all of that. So we've really expanded on what we mean by youth to not just include folks who are enrolled in schools, but also folks who are just young people between the ages of 0 all the way to around 25, 26 years old when you get kicked off your parents' insurance. And so with that being said, that's allowed us to have a greater touch with youth who are amongst our community-based organizations who we partner with, youth who are impacted by incarceration, youth who are houseless as well, and then youth who are not enrolled in school for a myriad of reasons, whether that's because they have to help their families with working or they're homeschooled, et cetera, right? And so with that, we are developing a youth arts council so that our youth are actually deciding on what it is that they're going to be exposed to, what kind of field trips we're going to be providing, and also how do they see themselves in the theater and how they see themselves taking over the theater, essentially. Helping us also make decisions regarding what type of content they're going to be exposed to, because as you all know, audiences are changing. So that's one aspect. So the next aspect I want to talk about is more of our cultural portfolio. And that's more so focusing on our internalized DEI work. So what does P5 actually look like when it comes to an equitable organization? And so part of the ad package that we've asked for is allowing us to do this kind of investigatory work. So working with consultants to run, I'd like to say, a gauge or an analysis of what the culture is like at P5 for the folks who are actually working at P5. So how they're experiencing P5, the folks in their cultural competency who work at P5, so that we're able to actually relate to our audience members and our community members and our youth, as well as what are our policies and procedures that we're still adhering to that are, quite frankly, antiquated and don't allow folks to actually access our theaters in a way. It's no secret, right, that the arts has been heavily gatekept, right, by really dominant populations. And so if we're not able to see ways in which we perpetuate that dominance inside our organization internally, we're not going to be able to actually expose our community members and youth to the type of programming and the type of spaces that they deserve to be in and to see themselves reflected in. So some of this is going to include actually doing a complete DEI analysis on our policies, practices, procedures, the decisions that we're making within P5, looking at hiring practices, looking at actually the landscape of representation within P5 as far as who actually works there. And then rolling out a robust training program that's helping our folks actually develop their cultural competencies and actually helping us achieve the level that we need to be able to take an open eye and say that this is what needs to change in order to actually bring in these community members. So I want to say that that's kind of melting into our external DEI work. And that's where our community arts program comes in, is where we're actually having community members helping us make those specific decisions. So if you can go to the next slide, please. I want to be really careful about my ambition for P5. So I really wanted to focus the specific outcome for this next year on something that we can actually contain. And so as you all can see, and I'm not going to read this for you all verbatim, but essentially what the focus is going to be is how do we create these touch points for our communities of color, our queer and trans community members, disabled and of varied ability community members, et cetera, right? Folks holding marginalized identities. How do we give them access not only to our theater spaces, but also giving them a voice in the ways in which they're actually experiencing not just our events at P5, but even the climate, right, and the culture of P5. And so the action that I would like to take is to actually initiate a community arts council that not only is going to serve in an advisory role as to what types of events we should be curating, right, at the community level, but also helping us develop our racial equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility action plan by being able to survey them and have them actually be a part of not just the event planning, but how are they experiencing P5 and what does the community need in order to have access to our spaces. Could you go to the next slide, please? And so some of the key equity metrics that we're taking a look at is the participation rate, right, for our Community Arts Council. So making sure that our community members are actually engaged and coming and showing up to monthly meetings, right? That also includes creating a system of compensation so that folks are compensated for their time and we're not tapping on already marginalized community members to provide us with the information that we need in order to, I want to say, build in the plan that makes the most sense for P5. And then I just do want to point out the last kind of marker here. With our community arts program, we're rolling out some of our first programming, starting with Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And already we've sold out our first event. And that's with all like BIPOC makers and all of that. So really exciting things that we already are starting to build up metrics for. This photo that you see here also is one of the events that we've done in the spring. This is Emma Donovan, who is an Indigenous Australian artist. And we were able to bring her to do a master class at King Elementary School and also explore King Elementary School's Museum of Modern Art and really be engaged with the students and the youth there. And so this is just the framing, right? Thinking about these three branches again of P5's DEI work, the internal work looking at our culture, the external work looking at our community and our youth as well. And then of course, building up our robust youth arts program. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Robin. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Ruby. I think you can tell from listening to Ruby, and if you've read through the materials, that this is a very ambitious program for P5. But as Ruby has said, this is a top-down effort. It requires every single department to participate for us to be able to accomplish the many things that we want to accomplish. And I think that we've built a budget that will help support us in these initial steps in this work. Next slide, please. So as been mentioned before, much of this programming is part of our budget modification package because this is new work for P5. So first of all is the security package, which Will alluded to earlier. It's about $410,000 for additional staff. We did a safety survey, and one of our greatest risks was the fact that we had security officers patrolling by themselves. And so this provides additional support for our patrols, as well as a security manager that can help us move and navigate through our security issues in a more strategic way. And then the rest of the program are the items that Ruby has touched on, which is our first sort of internal and community DEI work. That's about a little more than $200,000 of this approximately $600,000 package. It is our first time to really invest in this work, and I'm really proud of the leadership that Ruby and her team have taken on this, and I think you will be very pleased where we end up as we work through this next fiscal year. Next slide, please. So P5's investment in our budget really it advances Metro in the target area predominantly of economy. First of all, we provide a lot of jobs. We have 71 permanent positions and about 74,000 hours of event labor. So altogether, this is the equal of about 700 FTEs for FY24, which is not an insignificant number of jobs. We also provide considerable impact to the economy in terms of the procurement that P5 does with local businesses. That many of the work we do focuses on co-bid firms. For example, we've got about $2 million in materials and services just for building maintenance that is largely spent with companies in the region. And finally, our economic impact of $55.7 million in FY22, we imagine that to continue to grow. We're still waiting on our economic impact for FY23, but for some specific numbers there. But how we get those numbers will be the same. It's basically through direct and indirect spending on things like our facility operations and maintenance. The impact that our attendees who come to our shows and the shows from out of town that come to Portland spend in hotels and restaurants, and as well as our investment in capital projects, plus about a little bit more than $1 million in tax revenue that we generate. So the economic impact for P5 is an important part of the vitality of our city, and I think it's no secret the impact that we have to our downtown and being a major factor in helping our downtown recover from the COVID years. Next slide, please. So with that, I would be happy to any of us to answer any questions that you might have.
believe Council President Peterson has had to step away. So as deputy, I will help facilitate questions. I have one myself, but first, Councilor Rosenthal, please.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. Just a quick question. I think this is for Ruby particularly. Do we have anything in the budget that allows us or stimulates coordination for arts, particularly diverse arts, with the OPB system?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I don't think so at the moment. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what that framing would look like in your eyes?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, but it could include sort of select television presentations of some performances. They do a lot of cultural stuff, a lot of diverse arts things, and try and cover a broad range. I mean, I don't really know. I'm not an expert in this regard, but primarily I would think it'd be a venue for publicizing and actually providing other access to people who can't, for example, attend performances, but maybe ex post facto that can provide some of these shows on public television and things like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's absolutely something that we could look into. I know that one aspect of like our community outreach is also partnering with community-based organizations or other, right, community members who expose, I want to say, budding artists in a way that we can, and giving them a space to be able to perform or do something in our space in collaboration with these other organizations that can give them more light. I think that in my dreamy world, I think that P5 actually has the capacity to launch some sort of like artist or emerging artist incubation or residency program. And I think that that could be 100% a part of it, but it's just trying to start with these piloted initiatives.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think this budget really is the beginning building blocks of where we ultimately want to be. And so this is getting, the Youth Arts Council together. This is getting the Community Arts Council together. So these things so we have these groups that can inform us of what they find beneficial rather than us just making assumptions about our community. So.
Thank you for the question.
Great. Councilor Wong.
Oh, great. Thank you, Deputy President Lewis. Thank you for this presentation, and I really appreciated the tour that we took a couple of weeks ago. And I was wondering on a high level, like where does P5 see themselves kind of in the arts ecosystem, and especially in supporting kind of access to underrepresented communities? And I think we had talked about having events, in other parts of the region, not just, downtown Portland. And I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on what you have in mind for the upcoming year, and how do we increase access to folks that live, in East County or, further out on the west side. And I know like transportation downtown has always been a challenge. I don't know if that's like reflected in the budget, but yeah, basically, where do you see ourselves in kind of like the ecosystem and improving kind of the access to arts?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. Let me know if you also wanted to chime in there, Robin. I see P5 as a cultural cornerstone regarding in the arts ecosystem of Portland, 100%. I know that within the work that myself and Lillian are doing, we're actually trying to set up kind of like satellites or extensions of P5 in the community. And so we've done this in a number of ways already. I had already mentioned like King School, our King Elementary School. We have a relationship there. Park Rose High School is another relationship where we're actually trying to get out to East Portland, right? It's no secret that a lot of BIPOC community members and low income community members in general have been pushed to the outer edge of the city, and it's a lot harder to get into Central City from where they are. And so that's something that I definitely want to look at and would want some community guidance on, is how best to get folks to our stages. Also, how best to tap into other areas of the city where we can kind of be that extension. So they're not necessarily at the venues, but a representation of P5 in the communities. I feel like a number of ways we're doing this already is bringing master classes to community spaces. So not just like the schools, but also we're building a partnership with Alder Commons, which is a Northeast Portland community center where other community-based organizations actually run off of. run out of. And so I'm thinking doing things like this where we're actually getting into the community, doing true community engagement and being extensions of our actual venues is really going to help bring those folks over to P5. And I know this isn't built in for this year, but what's been on my mind is that there probably does need to be some sort of budget, something for transportation. So we want to get community members over to our venues, but we know that it's like rife with barriers. And so what do we need to build out with community guidance to actually get people, either it's like subsidies or discounts or something like that. Maybe this is something where we work with TriMet. I'm not sure, but I feel like all of our possibilities are endless.
I would say that P5 is probably one of the largest investors of the arts in the city. We subsidize the use of our halls for every nonprofit in the city. What we're needing to do now is, are we subsidizing the right groups? Are we really getting the access to our theaters and what we do and involvement in all things P5 to the extent that we should? I would say we have not. And that this is a step to start changing that. So that P5 really is the performing arts center for everyone in the region, not just a select few. And so this is starting that work that we think that will ultimately get us where we need to go.
I think the last thing that I want to say to you, something that we haven't done in Mass, I want to do an audience study, actually, specifically with marginalized community members, so that we know what are the shows that would get you downtown also, because people aren't just going to come for anything, especially when we know there's an economic crisis that's happening and all of that. We need the information to know what type of content they want to be exposed to in order to actually come downtown as well.
Thank you. And I really appreciate kind of that mindset of, being a cornerstone for, the broader arts community and not just thinking about 5 specific theaters, but really, that more expansive look of how do we increase access. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Counselor Simpson. Counselor, I don't think we can hear you.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy President. And thank you so much for that presentation. That was really good. And I really like the attention of getting out in community and getting underrepresented groups out there. I'll tell you, let's go a little further east. I'm sure there's a lot of folks who would love to be a part of this audience study that you're talking about. But my question is, and you may have answered this during your presentation, how do we get more local shows and artists access and opportunities to these spaces, particularly in those underrepresented groups, so that we can give more of a platform for them to share their art with everyone here in the region and anyone else who wants to come into the region?
Fabulous question. Thank you. That's absolutely a part of the community arts program, is giving light and space to emerging artists in our local communities. So whether that's through artist showcases, there are a couple of things that we have lined up this summer, actually, where we're going to have some local talent for the first time, right, performing at P5. And so that's all a part of the plan, is to make sure that this is like an actual program that comes from the community arts program, is that there's a local emerging artist program, and that we can do, I want to say, quarterly showcases and whatnot, so that we are getting talent right on the stages that they necessarily wouldn't have access to any other way. And so what I'm needing to do, though, is have the resources in place so that we can actually build that up. So that I can also have the capacity to partner with a lot of different organizations that work with local talent, et cetera, especially like BIPOC talent, queer talent, so that we can give them access to our spaces. Right now, I feel like folks in the community don't really know who P5 is. And that is also what we need to tackle.
Yeah, and I would also add that another component of this is we need to get out of a deficit mode and get into a more profitable mode, if you will, so that we have the resources that we can use to subsidize others' use of the hall that have not really had the ability to be on our stages in the past. So we're trying to, the P5 Foundation is helping us with our education programming, but there's a lot more on the community level that we want to do. And we need to make sure that we have the money to help subsidize the hall usage, to help them with labor costs and the things that become barriers to using our theaters. And so that's all part of the look, is how we, as we move through the budget, try and manage things so that we end up with enough resources that we can actually invest in the local talent, and also have more outreach into the extreme 3 counties that we serve.
Thank you so much.
Great, thanks. Colleagues, any more questions? I'd like to ask mine. So I guess first and foremost, when I hear that we are one of the largest investors in the arts in the city because of our subsidies, I stop short of patting myself on the back, because what that really is highlighting is the lack of investment by the city, by RAC, and by leaders in this community in the arts in Portland. So despite the fact that we do have a vibrant arts community, there are major funding opportunities that go by every year without people and organizations stepping forward. And if the city and RAC continue to be on their heels, I'd like to find a way that we can continue at Metro to be on our toes. And if we're going to be as ambitious as it's sounding like, we may need a rebrand, because we maybe don't need Portland in our name if we really do intend to serve the outskirts of the region. My question, though, is along the lines of the budget. We obviously have to balance program operations and then also the maintenance of the space. The P5 Foundation has been able in the past to step in various capacities, and I didn't see a way of filling in P5's intention to be part of our forecasted budget or expenditures. So could you, Robin, speak a little bit to where P5 Foundation is and their ability to work on some of our priorities in this coming year alongside us?
So currently, the P5 Foundation has some money sitting in the Oregon Community Foundation that came from the naming rights of our buildings. And so there's money there to fully fund the education program for next year and possibly another year after that. However, they are struggling with fundraising right now, as so many other arts organizations locally are. I think that the one thing that we have in our favor is that the sophistication of the youth program that we've put together is much different from what else is being done in town by many of the arts organizations, which is usually just let's bring the kids in, have them in a seat and watch the show. And I think that the degree that we're engaging with youth is new and different. It's going to be a needle turner for us. The foundation believes that the work that we're doing is going to appeal to local donors, but they've got a lot of work to do themselves to really make this happen. So, I'm not worried about next year and possibly the fiscal year after that, but the foundation's going to really need to get their feet under them after that to make sure that this work can continue into the future.
Great, thanks. I think of the relationship that we at Metro have in owning and operating the zoo alongside the Oregon Zoo Foundation, and our ability to forecast, but also essentially be boosters of each other. And that relationship is not there right now with P5. And not that we're going to get it to be in the same position, but having a good understanding of not only the challenges they're facing, but if they will be able to kind of come through in another couple of years, or do we need to start planning for 3 or 4 years out? So I appreciate that, Robin, and we can take further discussions offline. Colleagues, any other questions about this budget presentation? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to say thank you to our presenters. Thank you for a really innovative way of getting our communities back into the theaters and our theaters back into community. And colleagues, if you have questions, let's follow up individually. And we'll move on to our COO report.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. I am happy to defer my update to you until Thursday. It's not time sensitive.
That works. Counselors, any time sensitive counselor communication? Otherwise, we can hold that over as well. Nope. Okay. Well, seeing no further discussion, I will adjourn our council work session. Our next regular meeting is April 27th at 2 p.m. However, we will have a joint Metro Council and MERC meeting on the 27th at 10:30 a.m. See you all then and have a great day.
Recording stopped.